We have a good group today. We know that we're going to receive our ballots in the mail next week. And then we'll have just a few weeks to ponder them and read our voters' guides and get out and get some information, do our due diligence about the issues that are going to affect us nationally, statewide, countywide, and locally. So as a service club, we want to be involved in what's going to happen and educate our members and also see how it affects our main mission, which is what, helping the kids, so helping children. So we have two excellent speakers today who are experts on tax policy in Washington State regarding an initiative that's out, which is Initiative 1185. And I'm going to keep talking while you folks have some salad. So it's something that we've seen before. It's passed before in another iteration. And then the legislature waited 2 years and then took a vote and put it on pause, or so now we have another attempt at it. So we should be familiar with what two-thirds majority means, which means two-thirds of the legislature would have to vote in the affirmative to pass a fee or a tax, or it would have to go out to the vote of the people for any type of revenue-raising package. So we have two experts that can talk at greater length with greater detail. Just want to let you know about the forum. The format of the forum is that we'll have a little introduction. We'll have introductory remarks. We've planned on about 10 to 15 minutes for the whole forum. So if we will have questions near the end. I would like to run the questions as you're called upon. Those who have several questions, if you could just wait as people who have not had a question answered for them to bring it up. And we also are on the record with the West Seattle blog. Thank you for being here in our efforts to be transparent to all. So with that, I think we'll introduce the first guest of Ms. Carter, because this is their initiative for the affirmative and why we need to change. Thank you.
Well, hello, West Seattle. My name is Amber Carter. I'm with the Association of Washington Business. We are the State Chamber of Commerce, representing more than 8,000 employers in our state that total about 700,000 jobs. We'd like to have that number substantially higher, but as you know, unemployment rates in our state are still substantially high, and the economic recession that was facing us is still struggling in the bottom, and employers are struggling as well. Initiative 1185 will restore and continue the two-thirds majority vote requirement for tax increases. This will make it more difficult for lawmakers to pass increases, but not impossible. We saw this last legislative session when lawmakers worked together in a bipartisan manner because they had to. They were forced with the hammer of the supermajority requirement to work in a bipartisan manner and come up with budget solutions that were balanced, reforms that were adding to the sustainability of our system, and at the end of the day, they did enact two tax increases, one on petroleum and one for the removal of the first mortgage deduction for banks. Those you'll see in the ballot statement as well with the voters pamphlet. This is not new tax policy in our state. In fact, this will be the 5th time voters will have an opportunity to weigh in on this question. The previous 4 times, they said yes. Most recently in 2010 with a resounding 64% yes. If you count the time that lawmakers actually passed this requirement themselves, we'll have done it 5 times, with this being the 6th time. You might recall back in 2006, after lawmakers suspended it in 2005 to pass the death tax, they then reimposed a year earlier that suspended requirement. So they have chose among themselves to live with this requirement. It's not new. We are one of plus 17 other states that have this requirement across the nation. Yesterday, the Business Tax Climate Index was released by the Tax Foundation, showing our state improved and moving up to number 6. At least half of the states above that 25 mark, more than 2/3 of those states have supermajority requirements. So clearly it can lead to more sustainable efforts, and the Heartland Institute noticed that we have an observable effect on tax policy for budget sustainability for states that implement a supermajority vote for tax requirements. I want to just contrast this just a little bit. In 2012, I mentioned we had a bipartisan approach. We had budget solutions. We had efforts on sustainability for reforms. Compare this to 2010, when lawmakers did not have the constraints of a supermajority requirement. They passed a $6.7 billion tax package over a 10-year period of time, hurting companies like the service sector. I met yesterday with one of our members, Judy Kubert, over in Burien with Printcom, and she would love to have some of those straight printer jobs, but unfortunately she's struggling as her clients are service client companies, and they're not buying the marketing type of materials that they were in the past. So it all comes around. We'd like to see lawmakers work together. A bipartisan government is one that is democratic and that will lead to solutions that will create greater sustainability in the future, and we ask for your support of Initiative 1185. Thank you.
Thank you. Reuven.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. My name is Reuven Carlyle, and I live on Queen Anne with my wife, who's a physician at Virginia Mason, and our 4 kids, ages 15, 13, 11, and 6. I also have the great honor of serving as a part-time citizen legislator, representing people of Northwest Seattle. So I got out my passport, I got my visa stamped, got to West Seattle today, got all the papers in place to make it over here, and I just really appreciate it. I appreciate Amber's sentiment in talking about a supermajority. But one of the most beautiful aspects of the Kiwanis is to talk about real civic issues. And what I'd like to do today is I'd like to talk about the United States Constitution. I'd like to talk about Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. They specifically, actively, and forcefully asked themselves this very question. They debated this very question. Should there be a supermajority to pass laws? And this is what they said. Specifically, in all cases where justice or the general good might require new laws to be passed, under a supermajority, they said, the fundamental principle of free government would be reversed. It would no longer be the majority that would rule. The power would be transferred to the minority. I do not believe, with all due respect and more, that Tim Eyman, funded by British Petroleum and ConocoPhillips and the Beer Institute in Washington, D.C. as the 3 largest funders of this initiative of Mr. Eyman, I do not believe that they have a deeper sense of institutional knowledge of representative democracy than Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. Those founders fought vigorously and forcefully against tyranny of the minority. I ask you to remember one number today, 17. Under this Tim Eyman initiative funded by British Petroleum and ConocoPhillips and the alcohol industry, 17 state senators control legislation over 147 duly elected legislators representing 6.8 million people. 17 can stop any proposal dealing with revenue. Now, when we deal with revenue, I'm not just talking about the rhetorical idea of raising taxes. I'm talking about even so extreme as putting an expiration date on a tax exemption. Now, our state has chosen, through the public policy process, to institute 640 tax exemptions, tax credits, and preferential rates. And many of them, an overwhelming majority of them, I would argue, are good public policy. But the fact is, it is ironic that under Mr. Iman's proposal, it takes a simple majority of the legislature to create a tax exemption, but it requires a supermajority to expire or terminate or modify that same public policy. The exact same bill. It's undemocratic. In terms of it being constitutional, the argument from Mr. Iman is that the voters have passed this initiative a number of times. And I respect and I defer to the power of the people in a representative democracy. But Mr. Iman and British Petroleum and ConocoPhillips have specifically chosen not to submit a constitutional amendment to change our Constitution. The states that Ms. Carter referred to have all, with the exception of one other, Washington State and one of those states, have all chosen to change their Constitution. So what we have here from Mr. Iman and British Petroleum and ConocoPhillips and the alcohol industry is a conscious choice to use simple majority to eliminate simple majority. Using simple majority to institute a supermajority. Now, if the people of our state choose to change our Constitution, that is their right, and that's the beauty of direct democracy, and I support that, if they choose to do that. But the burden of changing the Constitution requires a supermajority. That is the irony, is that it is easier in our state to change the Constitution than it is to raise taxes or to expire a tax exemption. And I think that that's undemocratic, and I think it's unconstitutional. A very respected King County Superior Court judge has ruled that it is unconstitutional and now sits before the state Supreme Court. There's another issue. Ms. Simon talked about Ms. Carter talked about the ranking of Washington State relative to the Tax Foundation. This is a very conservative but very well respected national research institute relative to taxes. It lists us as the 6th best state in the nation in the quality of our business climate. Forbes magazine lists us 7th in the nation in the quality of our business environment. The New Economy Index, a very respected national ranking, ranks us 2nd in the nation in the quality of our business index. And we're 29th in the nation in the burden or the obligation of state and local taxes combined. So we have extraordinary high rankings in our quality of our environment, our business environment. Our taxation level is extremely modest. The question that we face in terms of representative democracy is if we want to institute a tool to paralyze the status quo into a frozen model of refusing any kind of structural change, we take away direct and representative democracy's ability to function. 17 state senators control the will of 147 elected representatives. And it just so happens that there are 17 members of the legislature who have signed Grover Norquist's pledge that under no circumstances will they ever, under any circumstances, raise taxes. And that in our state includes, under Mr. Iman's initiative, that includes closing any tax exemption or tax loophole. So I posit that this is undemocratic, it's unconstitutional, it goes against the foundation of this nation, and if the proponents want to institute this policy, I ask them to go through the process of direct democracy and representative democracy and change the Constitution itself, and not use simple majority to eliminate simple majority. Thank you.
Thank you, Reuven. If it's all right with folks, I think we can give like a 2-minute rebuttal from each side because There was a lot of information there, and I saw a lot of notes being taken.
Well, and there is
Thank you.
obviously strong points on both views of this issue, but I do want to rebut a couple of the facts that were raised. First of all, keep in mind with regards to where we are in jobs, I appreciate all the rankings, and I neglected to say that the Tax Foundation highlights one of the reasons we've come to the top is because we don't have an income tax, and we're not using all of our tax options. And that is a key signal to businesses who are looking at job location and opportunities, that government is not going to use every single opportunity to pile on taxes time and time again. So that is critical. The Economic Revenue Forecast Council met about a week ago. The question was asked, when will our state return to pre-2008 job levels, when there was a little bit more certainty to the job market? Not until at least 2014. That's a risk we can't take right now over the next 2 years. With regards to tax exemptions, these are basic, fundamental qualities of a tax code. Businesses cannot make a 5-year plan on a whim. They can't develop a business model every 1 or 2 years wondering if the manufacturing, sales, and use tax exemption is still going to be available, if the research and development tax incentive is going to be available, or if the small business tax credit is going to continue to be in its existence. These are tax policy issues, not loopholes. I don't know a single lawmaker, including yourself, that has ever passed a loophole in Olympia. So let's just take that terminology out of our discussion here. With regards to democracy, what is more democratic than a bipartisan legislature? I want Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate members working together to problem solve, not point fingers and have the problems that we have facing our national politics today. An example of that is legislation that our legislature passed on a rainy day fund. They said it should require a supermajority vote to change any rainy day fund monies and access that money unless it's an economic crisis. That was not an undemocratic move by our state legislature to amend the Constitution and ask for a supermajority vote at all. That's just accountability of fiscal resources to make sure that they're accessing our rainy day fund when it's appropriate and not just utilizing those monies and putting us in a situation that will hurt us in the future. Constitution. The Washington State Wire had about a 4-page article this morning about the Constitution, and an article that was written in August 9 of 1889 by the Seattle Times, going into great detail over the deliberations of our state constitution and the makers behind it. And when asked the questions and looking at the notes with regards to a simple majority, and remember, there's nothing in our constitution that precludes we, the people, from using our initiative power to direct our legislature and establish additional requirements, the issue was about establishing a quorum. Go back to territorial days. They didn't have sound transit and vehicles to drive in at a whim. They had buses, or boats, they had buggies, they had horses. There were territorial times. Crossing the islands from Whidbey to get over to Seattle was a little bit more challenging than just hopping the ferry. So establishing a quorum was what that issue was all about. Clearly our state Supreme Court has this matter squarely in front of them. They will rule on this in an expedited manner, and we're told it will happen before the legislature adjourns. We would appreciate if the legislature listens to the will of the voters for the 5th time, because this will pass, and actually implement a constitutional change themselves, because the people can't. Okay? The people can't change the Constitution, but they can direct the legislature using the initiative power through the Constitution that is granted to them. So take a look at that August 9, 1889 article. It is about quorum and territorial times. Thank you.
Yeah, Warren, you didn't write that article, did you?
Process of changing our state constitution is very clear. There is a very fair, thoughtful, and democratic process for changing the Constitution. Tim Eyman's choice to use the initiative process to restructure the very workings of government eviscerates the ability of the legislature to fund public education and to manage the public's tax dollars in a fiduciary way. 17 state legislators have the power over the will of 147 elected representatives. Washington State's taxes, in talking about the business climate, so I've been in business my entire career. I've raised a lot of money from private equity. I've founded or co-founded a number of companies here in Seattle in the technology industry, and I've really learned a lot about why companies succeed or fail. And in most cases, in my belief, companies focus in on high-quality employees, workforce, an educated workforce, and great quality public infrastructure. The issue of whether or not a tax exemption should be modified or changed is a very legitimate public policy debate. And I believe that most of the 640 tax exemptions that we have designed in the state makes sense. But the idea that we have a commission that looks at tax exemptions, and their reports sit on the shelf and gather dust and are untouched, because the power of those 17 state senators who make it clear that under no circumstances will they allow a tax exemption to be modified, in my view, is simply undemocratic. Washington state tax rates are lower than Idaho. Washington state tax rates are lower than Oregon, lower than California, lower than North Carolina, lower than South Carolina. Why has the Greater Seattle Chamber of Commerce, the largest chamber of commerce in our state as a regional entity, voted against 1185? Why have they come out against it? The answer is that the ability of us to have a transportation infrastructure, for us to stop the doubling of tuition at the University of Washington, of our ability to fully fund basic education, has been eviscerated by the 17 legislators who made it clear that under no circumstances, unequivocally, will they allow any revenue at all. Unequivocally. That is not bipartisan. That is not a bicameral approach to representative democracy. I appreciate the sentiment, and Amber's a very, very well-respected lobbyist in Olympia who really knows a lot about tax policy, and I really do appreciate her insight. But for me as a business person, for me as a citizen legislator, as a volunteer trying to talk about the balance between direct democracy and initiative process, which we respect and treasure and value in our state, which has been taken over by British Petroleum and ConocoPhillips and the Beer Institute of Washington, D.C. I ask you to ask yourself this very question. Why would those three organizations choose Washington State to fund an initiative about our representative democracy? The CEO of British Petroleum, as far as my research has been able to tell, has never been to Washington State, and yet hundreds of thousands of dollars from his company is funding Tim Eyman's initiative. Why is that? Why is ConocoPhillips interested? The answer is direct retaliation for the legislature's attempt to institute a modest fee, modest tax, to pay for the cleanup of Puget Sound and mitigate the negative effects of oil runoff. That's the answer.
All that good for time.
And the Beer Institute has a similar incentive of why they're funding Tim Eyman's initiative.
Thank you. So, thank you both. Warren, we're going to get to your question. I do want to thank both of you for your dynamic and passionate.
We're not boring speakers.
No. And thanks for bringing it up. So we'll have some questions now, and we'll give it to privilege to the president.
Okay, this question is for both of you. Is there a ceiling to which federal, state, and local taxes, fees, and permits can cost a small business operator without him going bust or curtailing the hiring of the employees?
You know, it's a pile-on effect, and when you look at all of the issues combined, that's really the impact on small businesses. You have to look at labor costs, overhead, your product development, marketing, and so on. So I know that there's not any established legislative or federal requirement for those issues. It's more of an issue based on your personal circumstances for your company. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah. I would just easier. So the question is there a maximum of state obligations, state and local taxes? I would say that the overall combination of state and local taxes in Washington State is ranked 29th in the nation. We're lower than Idaho, we're lower taxes than Oregon, lower than California, South Carolina, and many other states. The sentiment is very legitimate. Is there a tipping point where it becomes very difficult for small business? And I think we all agree.
There is for gas.
There absolutely is a price elasticity, if you will, of your ability to run a business, a small restaurant like these. No question about that. But the question is there a balance of an educated workforce and public infrastructure, which is the real reason that companies survive and thrive with the support of the business community and the support of government together to provide the kind of access to education so that you have the kind of employees, which is one of the central reasons that enable or that support small businesses' ability to function.
So we're going to try to get in a lot of questions.
Okay.
So if we could be succinct, concrete, and concise. And we'll share the lectern since we have it. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I'm not sure it was the Supreme Court or one of the district courts in the state recently said that the primary focus of the legislature should be education.
The clear decision.
How do you, given the fact that we're going to have an increasing population, that's forecast, what, another million in the next 10 or 15 years? How does that, what I'm getting at is how are you going to be able to, because you're going to have to raise taxes to raise education, how are you going to be able to do that if there is a severe restriction on the ability to raise taxes?
So I think that's directed to me. The McCleary decision basically outlines about a $4 billion need for funding our education system to meet the constitutional obligation. I don't think that's a partisan issue. It clearly is a bipartisan issue to make sure that we have the job skills and education for our workforce that Reuven had spoke of. There's about $1 billion that is due in 2013 to start the process of meeting that $4 billion obligation. A number of work groups have been in place for a while to establish funding goals for the model school formula that was put in place a couple of years ago. But more importantly, there is a work group in place to respond to the Supreme Court with regards to how they're going to implement and achieve that $1 billion for the 2013, and then of course going on from there. That letter has been issued to the Supreme Court, so they have some response from the legislature. I do want to talk just briefly about education though, because if you care about education, we hope that you'll vote yes on 1185, not just because of the funding issue, but because of the reforms that are necessary. In places like Seattle, it's hard to have differential pay, to pay teachers to come to the Seattle area where it's more expensive to live. Well, if you want differential pay, we have to have discussions about reforms and not just about money in the classrooms, which is very, very important. If you care about strong principal power, to make sure that the principal has the ability to hire and fire good and bad teachers, we have to make sure we're talking more than just money, we're talking about reform. If you want to reduce the size of the regulations that are facing classrooms so that they can be more free to actually teach the student, we have to talk more than just money. At the end of the day, money is very, very critical. At the beginning of the day, money is very critical. But we have seen that without the pressure of a supermajority vote, we won't talk about reforms, we'll only talk about money.
So just very briefly, the McCleary decision, it is absolutely, unequivocally, without question, impossible to raise funding for public education outside of the normal natural rate of growth of population of tax activity without acknowledging the cold hard reality on the ground. It's just with a supermajority under 1185 from Tim Eyman, it is simply impossible to increase funding for public education. It will not happen. Of the 18 states that have supermajority, every single one of them receives a C or less in national rankings from Education Week and other top independent education analysis of the quality of their education system. Every one. Every one. That's why tuition has gone from $6,800 to $12,600 in 4 years. We simply do not have any flexibility to be balanced. I appreciate the sentiment of reforms. I support those reforms. I voted for those reforms. I will continue to do so. The question is, can representative democracy function with the entire grip controlled by 17 state senators? And I don't think it's possible.
Can we make this the last question so we can get out on time?
So, these previous 4 initiatives that were of the similar vein that we're talking about, how is this one, is there a significant difference of this one compared to those? Is there some, this whole thing about the idea that after 2 years, the legislature can override the initiative? So is that different with this one?
No, that's actually in our state constitution, that the legislature has the ability to modify a initiative after 2 years.
And they consistently have.
And they consistently have, that's in our state constitution. So, but the language in 1185 is the same as in 1053, which was passed previously. And I would note that, I applaud Tim Eyman and British Petroleum and ConocoPhillips for their funding of this initiative relative to their ability to get over 300,000 signatures in terms of $4 or $5 per signature that they pay in order to get this level of signature. So I appreciate that, the reality of that.
Have Ms. Carter address the differences between
This is substantially scaled down than some of the previous initiatives. You remember the first one was Initiative 601 that set up spending limits for our state in addition to supermajority requirements. Initiative 960 had a whole host of requirements for advisory ballots, OFM estimates, fiscal analysis, etc., plus a supermajority vote. This one is scaled down just like 1053 was 2 years ago to simply focus in on the tax and fee issue, supermajority for taxes, simple majority for fees. Any tax can be sent to the voters.
Great. So with that, let's thank our guests for coming. And go ahead, Mike.
Hey, you can't get out of here without the various bits and bobs.
Of course.
That's why we come.
We do something a little different. Let's see, I think we'll do ladies first. Certificate of Appreciation, Senator Carter. And a Certificate of Appreciation, Representative Reuven Carlyle.
Thank you.
Now, something we do differently is some people give pens and cups and things. We don't. We have an agreement, and we work with Page Ahead, who provides books to underprivileged kids in the community. And what we do is we put your name in the front of this. I'm going to get that back from you, by the way.
Definitely.
And those are the kids.
I just get to see my name in print, though. That's
Exactly.
Thank you. There you go.
That's what I
I'll let you.